hope you're all doing well and had a great week. We've got our panel here today to talk about telco futures, and I think many of us, including myself, who've worked in telco for a number of years, had some really good insights and conversation and even challenge around where the industry is going and how we reinvent ourselves. But before we get into that panel, I'd love our guests to sort of self-introduce themselves, and so I'll take them, we'll go along the row here. So Matt, did you want to just say a few words, introduce yourself, and tell us about something about yourself maybe, or something interesting that maybe no one knows about?
Awesome. G'day everybody, and aloha. Excited to be here and good to be back. So my name's Matt Lough. I'm part of Telstra International's business. My role in Telstra is to manage the relationship with our global hyperscalers, the OTTs and all the content providers. So that's both Australia business, but also our international subsea and other assets throughout the world. So excited to be here and look forward to the session. Something you don't know about me is I'm an Aussie through and through, mais je parle français aussi. Donc j'ai vécu beaucoup d'années en France.
Oh.
Donc, merci, and look forward to the next 30 minutes.
Thanks, Matt.
I'm Nadya. So Matt and I worked together actually before the pandemic for about 8 years in different roles at Telstra. During the pandemic, the Brits offered me a lot more money and I went to Vodafone. So that's what I do now in Singapore. I run now the enterprise customer solutions teams for APAC and the Middle East for Vodafone Business. One thing you don't know about me, well, two things, is that the last time Darren and I went on stage was at Formula One in Singapore. And right after that, I flew to Austin for that Grand Prix as well. So I'm a massive Formula One fan. And also, we've just bought a luxury sail yacht in Langkawi. And so we're spending a lot of time on it as well. That's what we're doing.
I think we've got to do our event there. Okay, and Dean, Dean, Disruptive Dean.
Yeah, Dean Bubley, although some people will know me as my online alter ego of Disruptive Dean. I'm a technology and telecoms industry analyst and advisor, and I sort of comment sometimes slightly acidly on all sorts of issues, from spectrum policy to what telecoms will look like in 2030 to stuff around business models and so on. Something people don't know about me, I sometimes do improv comedy.
Oh.
It's a new thing.
Not very often,
joke? Yeah. Well, I can ask the audience for a situation and a mood, and if someone says it would be a happy penguin in a bar, then I can probably come up with something, but I'm not going to right now.
Yeah. All right, well, we'll leave that to the end perhaps, or maybe a question from the audience. And on that note, if there are any questions, please feel free to just jump up anytime, but also we'll leave some time for questions along the way. So welcome your questions, comments, and perhaps even some grenades, if only small, for this panel. So telco futures. So a bit about myself as well. I've been KPMG for 8 years, and prior to that, 20 years in IT telecom. Many of our colleagues and friends are all here. But if I reflect on the world of telco and the challenges telco have faced with public cloud, hyperscalers, data analytics, we're seeing this transformation of how do I monetize my customer base more? How do I transition my B2B business more with the emerging technologies? But how do I also reinvent the DNA of a telco to be more like a tech company? And so this conversation of telco, techco is something that we've been talking a lot about, and in Asia there's a lot of telcos who have gone on that journey. But I think also historically we've seen a lot of telcos try and fail with big acquisitions. And so in a nutshell, there's this kind of crossroads moment for telco. And so today we've got a number of panelists here that, Nadya's got the customer, Matt's got a bit more of a view on infrastructure. And actually, if we try and move up the stack across those areas, how do we do that? What are we seeing around the world? And some ideas that perhaps might inspire the audience here to think differently about that. So perhaps I'll start with the customer side. I'll actually ask you, Nadya.
Yep.
You work at Vodafone, you're looking at customer solutions. I think you've got similar challenges around growth and how do you grow more? Can you share with us some of the insights and perhaps the observations you're seeing right now?
Well, we'll talk about the ecosystem later, but I think, when you're selling to a telco, when you're selling to a cloud services provider, when you're selling to an OTT, the end game is always to serve the enterprise customer, right? Or the consumer and who consumes your services. And so that ecosystem is something we'll go into later. But where we are seeing the biggest challenges is still on the ARPU of the network. or any connectivity that you have, whether it's mobile, network, etc. And therefore, you've got to create a value proposition that is greater than that, still leveraging your best assets, which is the network, and how you build up the stack. What I've learned in the last 2.5 years when we serve banks, when we serve mining companies, etc., is that the up-the-stack value of what you create as an enterprise service management framework or delivery framework becomes absolutely crucial. And you can put any box on a network, right? The technology is becoming very, very similar or very, across the board in the industry. But it's the trust and the delivery and the enterprise framework and the flexibility of that when you actually serve different types of industries becomes absolutely crucial. And then building the ecosystem with partners. And the ecosystem with partners is not just about the network or the mobility transport or the spectrum that you've got. It's about what you do when you are solutioning for customers as well. So the flexibility of the portfolio that you've got in scale, to scale, whether you're serving a small, medium enterprise to a larger enterprise, is absolutely crucial. And that's what we're seeing. And that's what we're seeing where we're successful, when we're actually mitigating the degradation of the revenues on the network or the spectrum, is when you actually bring a full managed services suite together. Now, customers are still buying in very different ways. A lot of customers, some of them are doing DIY. You've got the hybrid models where they want it to be co-managed, or you've got a fully managed service as well. And you have to have the ability to be able to translate between those three different frameworks for an enterprise customer. Banks, for example, are also telcos. So it's not just telco that's moving to telco. Financial services are doing it. A lot of customers are doing it as well. So the ability to complement a customer requirement is absolutely crucial now. And the ability to be flexible with that managed service is something that we all have to be embracing. And I think a lot of the newer companies, when you look at the industry, have the ability to do that because they don't have legacy. So for telcos, it's easier if you actually forget about legacy and you start creating new from the top, right? And legacy will always be there, right? And you can't debate that or you can't compete against that. But when you start building from the top and you're actually able to deliver solutions at scale, that is actually where we see the benefit coming through on the degradation of the ARPU for the network.
So does that mean, from a customer-facing point of view, with your sectors or industries, you need more insight within the sector to engage more deeply with those customers?
Yes. So in our teams, for example, we have solution architecture sitting in pre-sales. It doesn't sit in delivery. It doesn't sit within the because you have to need the expertise to be able to do that. You've got consultancy sitting up front. And the reason for that is because to understand what you then take to market is what your customer requires. And those requirements go back into what we develop as solutions. So that upfront model has actually been very successful for us. If you look at Vodafone, when it comes to managed services or unified comms or IoT even, we're at the top of any quadrant or any analyst brief. And that's the reason for that. You can actually sell any technology, but that framework that you create for what complements your customer becomes absolutely crucial.
Yeah, I think the shift on the front office is getting more and more pronounced. So rather than bottom up, it's sort of a top-down sort of thinking. Dean, from your world sort of views and what you're seeing, does it support what you're seeing, or are there different views?
I would broadly agree, and I sort of see there's a couple of different ways to frame the role of, well, telcos or telecom capability providers, and I'll distinguish those in a second. I think the first one is this shift from, particularly for B2B, from services to solutions. And I think that part of the problem is historically we've grown up with KPIs like ARPU, and that doesn't really mean very much. If I've got a port and there's 40 cranes and each one has got multiple cameras, but I'm selling 40 SIMs for a private network on the port, is ARPU a meaningful number, or is my annual contract with the port operator the key variable there? Dividing it by 40 SIMs makes no sense. So I think that there's some language and perception around services and solutions and how we measure those. The other side, I think that I'm seeing importance from the telcos to be capable of being both the lead actor or a member of supporting cast, depending on the situation. And I don't think that the telecoms industry is very good at the supporting cast role. There's always a moment I tend to find, and you see this, for example, in satellite at the moment, where the satellite industry is doing a bunch of things, and the mobile operators are turning up with a sort of, guys, we're here to save everything. Here's next generation of the standards, and everyone's looking at it going, that's great for this niche, but you're the secondary here. Don't try and come and pretend that you
I think they've never played well. I mean, working in many telcos, did we play well in playgrounds, or did we want to be the number one? And there's a bit of this funny DNA sometimes I'm seeing with telcos, and I think there's more need to be able to play together. And we'll touch on that in a second too. But that's great, Dean. Great insight. I'd love to move to you, Matt.
Yep.
We talked about the front side and the changes that side, and you're sort of more on the infrastructure side. And I'd love to hear more about sort of what you do and sort of how do you view, for a better word, going up the stack in the infrastructure side. How do you get more out of what you're doing? What are you seeing with hyperscalers or your observations in the work you've done all around the world with Telstra?
Sure. And your initial question was around the growth, and then Nadya brought in the ARPU and Dean as well. So for us, the growth is the exciting part. So we've got our first female CEO, Vicky Brady, start last year, and she's come in with a really strong ambition around growth. So for us as an industry, evolving technologies are drastically changing the way we live and work, and it's really critical that we as an industry, continue to invest in that underlying infrastructure.
Yep.
And it's both new infrastructure, obviously, but also existing infrastructure. So an announcement the other day from Infinera on Unity cable, going up to I6 and getting an extra 25% of capacity on existing infrastructure is really important. So we can't lose sight of what's already in the water or what's already in the ground, but it's also that new investment as well that we're looking at. So the ARPU model is an interesting discussion. If we continue to live on cost per meg, cost per gig, or cost per route, where we're fighting a limited battle there. So for us, it's about that value stack selling, and it's a bit of a buzzword, but it's going up the chain. And how it manifests itself in Telstra is we've got Telstra Purple, and this is an industry-wide discussion about the inorganic growth, so acquisitions or partnering versus looking at organically within your organisation to create a services model. So it's traditionally been an enterprise play, selling up the stack in enterprise, but more so in the carrier space and wholesale segments, we're finding that if we can have that natural progression to value-added services within submarine networks, so whether it's design, build, consult, and manage, NOC management, submarine maintenance, using our resources, so our field services, trying to monetize that, but also, we have a commercial interest back to our shareholders and all of us back to our businesses, but it's providing a bit of a philanthropic view as well. How do we use and leverage our technology for the emerging markets, which I'll pause and wait for a later part on that. So.
Well, it's a great, I was already thinking about that when you were saying that bit, but if I reflect on a lot of the audience that I know coming at PTC, you've got your submarine cable operators, you've got private equity who look to invest in long-term assets to recover value, but you talk just about just getting 25% more out of what you've got, doing more with less. And I think in this coming challenging years with perhaps, we're talking about maybe recession or downturns, we're all going to be challenged to do more with less. So those type of value propositions sound really amazing. I did actually want to ask you about sort of the work that you've been doing, because I also understand you've been in a digital divide and helping nations in the Pacific get more connectivity and become part of this digital ecosystem, because today anyone can become a coder, jump on Coursera, get some skills, and off you go. You could almost be doing some work offshore, and we're seeing that across Southeast Asia already. But tell us a bit, about what you've been doing there with Telstra. That's quite an interesting space, and the ecosystem perhaps that you've been generating there.
Yeah, so we look at ecosystems, and I think Nadya's going to talk a bit about the verticals. So obviously there's a B2B play in vertical, mining, education, resource sector. We've got to also look at it from a vertical around geographical verticals. So emerging markets is something where we've been heavily focused on. So our pedigree in Asia Pacific, over 100 years operating there with some assets. We're now looking at new assets and how can we help those emerging markets. So the Pacific, our recent acquisition of Digicel Pacific, is a bit of a partnership with the Australian government, and that's something I think we'll touch on quickly at the end around partnering. So for us, the Pacific's been a very underserved market. Obviously, the satellite operators have been doing a great job there, but that is just the fundamental core. We need to, how do we get a digital economy? How do we get the basics, education, healthcare? And again, it's not that return as investors, it's more about how do we provide a service to a country to help get them, out of the water, for lack of a better sense, to try and help the submarine assets come into the countries. So one thing we're looking at now is further investment within the region. Obviously in 2001, back in December, with the Tonga volcano. There was a catastrophic event, and Telstra really, jumped on the front foot, deployed some satellite infrastructure in there to help at a short term. But now we're looking at that long-term longevity of the region. So that's a really big focus for us, both from a shareholder perspective, but also how do we help the communities?
It's great work. I mean, I think you mentioned basic needs, health, education, and probably arguably technology now.
Yeah.
I mean, if my daughter didn't have her iPad or iPhone, like she'd probably go crazy, and then she's not thinking about healthcare and education at this point. So I think basic technology.
I was just going to jump in on Saturday at Pitta. I heard when Hawaii first landed in Samoa, it was like they believed in unicorns. They had almost like air conditioning for the first time. So it's really that massive step change for the community.
That's great. Yeah. And Dean, maybe I jump to you from your observations around, I mean, if I were to throw the question around, so if you're an infrastructure operator today, wanting to get more out of what you've got, go up the stack per se, or monetize differently, what are the type of things you're seeing and perhaps we could be thinking differently about?
Well, I mean, there's many different classes of infrastructure, and probably the one that leaps out to me is what I'm seeing with tower companies at the moment. And they are definitely becoming more involved in things like private networks, neutral host, wholesale wireless, lots of different sort of layers you can break that out at. But I know, for example, there's one of the tower companies in Europe, Cellnex, has active radio as part of its deal in Poland, where they're using Open RAN technology, and they are becoming a quasi-operator. And obviously that's moving up the stack into the traditional mobile operator space. But I also see them doing more for in-building, working with municipalities. Sometimes they will push forward into sort of smart city, or at least smart city infrastructure. Yeah. But I think there's still quite a lot to go in infrastructure capabilities and services at a higher level. We mentioned maintenance and so on, or wholesale models, before you necessarily get to sort of e-commerce or finance or content, although some are doing that as well. The other area I'm seeing that is around FTTX in a lot of markets, where you've got open access fiber that's not just for residential homes and multi-dwelling units, but also for backhaul and front haul to cell towers, maybe municipal CCTV cameras and traffic lights and other street furniture. So there's certainly ways to sort of expand horizontally. And the last thing I would say is that there's an opportunity, rather than using this phrase up the stack, is actually use the language of the oil industry, where you talk about upstream and downstream. Yeah. And actually the value-add products are downstream. So upstream is getting oil out the ground, downstream is refining it and selling it as gasoline or diesel. And you don't need to do those in the same parts of the world, because you've essentially got the oil price in the middle as the balancing factor. And so you can actually end up with this sort of counter-cyclicality, which allows you not just to sort of sell value-add products, but also to sort of deal with pricing effects through the value chain.
That's really good. And when you mentioned towers, I reflect on a few conversations I've had with these tower cos and et cetera, and I was saying, well, what's the value in that? I mean, obviously off balance sheet, frees up cash, but in the world of edge and edge processing, high velocity, low friction, they're saying, well, maybe these could be mini data centers or locations where data is stored on the edge. I know. Well, what do you think, Dean?
At the margin, yeah. And in some places it would make sense, but there's so many physical locations you can put a small data center. It could be on an industrial park with lots of power and fiber.
You need access to.
It could be Amazon owning a supermarket with a chiller room. I'm extrapolating. But the point is that there's nothing particularly unique about the base of a cell tower, especially if it's a rooftop one in an urban centre, where they're renting the space and it's actually the building owner's space and the telco is the tenant rather than the property owner.
Not sure if anyone's got points of view or questions, but please feel free. Switching gears, so we talked a bit about growth, customer, how infrastructure can also evolve and change that. Let's move into sort of ecosystem, 5G, kind of, how does that look like? And, Nadya, from your point of view, you've got a lot of customer insights and solutions. Can you share with us some of the ecosystem things that we should be thinking, considering as we grow and sort of transform telcos?
So I'll explain Vodafone Group, and this is where I go with the customer footprint as well. So in Vodafone Group, we've got different operating companies. When you're an operating company, you have your own spectrum, you have your own fixed networks, and we own those assets. Obviously, we're also looking at Telco in Europe, etc., and how we actually utilize that for mobile spectrum specifically. Where we don't have spectrum, but we still have the solutions that complement that, or the network, we call it partner markets. Australia is a big example. Our partner is TPG. And so I might be building a mining infrastructure for mobile private network in Western Australia. The spectrum I use is with TPG. I probably use a Nokia box, and then how you bring that ecosystem together becomes the managed services framework that Vodafone Group's managed services complements with whoever you partner with as well. And so that's becoming absolutely crucial. You have to get the best in breed from the partners that give you the best outcome for your end customers. And we're finding that we have to be, when I joined 2.5 years ago, I think there was a very rigid way of looking at things. What we have done there is broken that and become more flexible. Middle East, for example, is it's a regulated market, right? And partnerships not just with service providers or telecoms companies, but also private equity funding. Where are you going to get that from as well? And that becomes the whole basis for what you invest in your customers. And when customers see that, hey, you're willing to invest time, effort, and energy into what we require as a service, and then build that framework with them on that journey, it becomes a very palatable thing for them to consume. Because I will never create a solution without a customer input. And so that becomes the biggest play for us within Vodafone. The ability from also is for anywhere. So in Asia Pac, Middle East, we have 70 headquartered companies that we take care of from an MNC point of view. We obviously have smaller companies because we tier it that way from a small, medium to large MNCs. And to demonstrate the ability that we can sell globally for those MNC headquartered companies in region is something that a lot of customers are actually catching on to. And so that's why we've actually grown, outside of Europe, we've actually grown the region by 25% year on year, even during a pandemic, because of the flexibility of being able to also move with the trends, right? So the trends are, and Vodafone does this Fit for Future report every year. It's our proprietary report. And we ask customers what the trends are for the next 3 to 5 years. And we update it every year. So it's an annual thing that we do. And so the flexibility of the movement of people working from anywhere is something that you have to cater for within organizations as a customer. Security becomes a play. It's not just a product that sits in a silo. You've got to ensure that that happens across the board. And with the advent of obviously 5 or 6G connectivity even now, then what does that IoT bring together? Once we look at those solutions, you then go into digital inclusion and what you can offer the market where everybody gets connected to. You also look at sustainability and how that brings together the technical requirements to be sustainable moving forward. So that's where we are, and that's how the ecosystem is coming together for us.
What I'm hearing there is the market's leading the shift to operate differently. And flexibility, some of the words you mentioned, like flexibility and being able to work and focus on the customer and what they want. Funnily, that's not often the DNA of a telco who likes to productize and just sell products, right? And I was talking to, I think, Joe earlier, and I was saying, well, it's so against the telco model. And he was saying, well, actually, you got to remember where telcos come from. The telcos are very much around sort of delivering reliable, trusted, regulated networks. And so that's, by design, a very structured type of organization. Whereas in this new digital native world, it's like anything goes. I'll design an app however I want to design it. So I think there's this mix of culture, mix of ways of working, and in working more with customer focus and design, like you don't want 10,000 different options either, because how can you manage that?
That's right.
Any comments?
I was going to say, it's interesting as well, because what's happening now, particularly with 5G, is the rise of industries wanting their own networks. And sometimes they'll work with service providers, but you mentioned regulated industries. You look at like the utility sector or the rail sector, they've got their own ways of working, which are just as sort of come from a history of regulation and certification and so on. And often they've run their own communications networks in the past as well. So 5G is just another form of communication to go on top. And I think it's a challenge sometimes for the traditional telecom service providers to work around the world where you've got each industry's got its own needs, its own history, its own culture, And also you've got enablers like virtualization, in a lot of places moving to not quite spectrum as a service, but it's getting a lot easier to get hold of bits of spectrum if you've got a factory or a port or a railway line. And so I think that's a real challenging environment for the traditional telcos to work not just with the startups and the innovators, but with something like a railway company that's got a manual of certification 5,000 pages long.
Yeah, so each sector has its own infrastructure.
Yeah.
And if you want to go digitizing that, you need to sort of rethink that. I mean, Matt, what's your point of view on that?
So I think one aspect of come of this is, so 5G is driving so much more capacity as well. So on our network, we've got a build plan of 70 terabits this year. We're only halfway through the year, we're 85% through that plan. So all these use cases on 5G and IoT, yes, they're part of it. There are other aspects, but it's driving so much more capacity. So that critical infrastructure is becoming far more, use the same word, critical. We've also realized that 5G is very important, but if you're not close enough to the edge from a compute perspective as well, it's almost irrelevant from a latency. So we've got Infraco, a business unit in Australia that we've set up all our passive assets. We've moved into a separate entity in Infraco, where we are now using over 600 exchanges to work out how we use edge compute capacity, but also coupling that with the subsea assets and LEO and everything. How does that come as a collective, again, the solution discussion, because you can't just drop a SIM card with 5G and assume it's going to work for an industry use case. So
yeah, I mean, there's
that grouping.
Exactly, and so there's the industry, there's the apps and the users, and that industry is going to use that. There's the connectivity that needs to enable that, and so there needs to almost be a bit of a deliberate focus on where do I want to go as a telco, not just do everything more, right?
Yeah.
Correct, yeah.
And it may be that you pick certain verticals, and it could be an industry vertical, it could be a geo vertical, and it may well be you specialize on mining, or you specialize on ports or airports or government and military or healthcare. Realistically, even AT&T and China Mobile aren't going to be able to do everything. And so, there's 3, 4, 5 that you specialize in, and then maybe there's a couple of platform plays that go across the others and with an appropriate partnership.
So working together, collaboration, but the way of working, customer focus is really the message, and then supporting, making sure our infra supports it and steps up where you need to. Just mindful of time, and we've got 5 minutes left. I just want to see if there are any questions from the audience, please. Yeah. If you use the mic over there, actually, so the online audience can hear.
Hi.
Hi.
Because we are talking about the future of telecommunication, I would like to have from everyone on the stage one sentence. What is the biggest challenge in the next 5 to 10 years, and why?
Biggest challenge and why? Maybe we'll start with Matt.
Also, just quickly, I think it's a challenge, but we also flip it as an opportunity, and not to be, put buzzwords out there, but the integration of LEO and the hyperscalers. So hyperscalers drew down 6% of the internet 12 years ago. They're now over 66%, 2/3 of the internet. The opportunity and the challenge is collaboration. So how do telcos, this is not one sentence, I'm very mindful of that, but how do we, telcos, hyperscalers, LEO operators, and regulators work together? That's the challenge.
Nadya?
It's not one sentence. I can't do it in one sentence, sorry. So for me, the future of the telco is how you actually get the best benefits of what you're really good at, which is the network and the spectrum, right? And then when you actually bring that ecosystem together, it actually creates a very strong proposition. We cannot be rigid anymore. We have to open up and be flexible to enable that future. And that's how we have to, come together with customers. I think for me, the customer ecosystem with our suppliers and partners becomes absolutely crucial to define that future even further.
I'll go for a policy challenge, and I think this is a challenge for regulators and governments, is that understanding that telecoms is too important to just leave up to telcos, and how to deal with a much more fragmented and heterogeneous world of network owners, network users, network builders. What are the metrics, what are the regulations, whether that's spectrum or KPIs and monitoring. And I think that the policy world hasn't quite got its head around the fact that there's this whole sort of Cambrian explosion of new players.
I would say, if you look back at why big hyperscalers or big tech giants were 50x their revenue stream and telcos are worth 5 or whatever, we have a hypothesis that if you want to go 10x, you need to be using data the way they're using it. So the biggest challenge for a telco is how do you change your organization be more data orientated, but not lose sight of what your actually core business is. And it's super hard because culturally and skills and capabilities are totally different. But great question. Thank you very much for that. Hope you got a wide range of responses there. We've got a question here and a question here. So we've got a minute and a bit. So Joe, a quick one, and then we'll another.
Yeah, just briefly. All the time, just turning on the mic. Briefly, innovation is hard. If you take a look at the allegedly impressive innovators, I won't name names for defamation lawsuit purposes, they actually have one core business idea that they innovated, and everything else basically has been a dismal failure, where either they've canceled the service, had to acquire someone else, or just copied someone else's capability. And I'm talking about some of the leaders and the names. And so the question is, given that innovation is so challenging, I love the phrase ambition for growth. And so really the question is, can telcos really grow their way? Is there any capability, given that risk avoidance approach, to hope that actually we can see some sort of massive growth? And if so, how and why?
I think that's a nice way to sort of end this session. So maybe we'll have everyone answer their response to that. Is there a way telcos can actually grow? And if so, how, Matt?
Yes, we can grow, I guess. But yeah, good question, mindful of time. But yeah, we're focused intrinsically on growth as well. So obviously there's the acquisition piece, but we're continually having our innovation labs. It's got to be in partnership though. I'm going to use that word again, but we can't grow ourselves with our own products and services. We need to partner. It's really plain and simple, the way we're approaching.
When you asked the question, the first thing that came to my mind was "Just do it," Nike's slogan, right? And it's not a Vodafone Group phrase that we use, but it's our group in Asia Pac and Middle East. Just do it and fail fast. So even if it doesn't work, have the flexibility and the courage to do it, because you have to try. If you don't try, you'll never know if you can, right? And so that's what we live in the organization within the APAC market for Vodafone. That's our biggest thing that we say to ourselves on a daily basis, even with our teams and with our peers, etc. And that's why we've been successful, even in a declining market, because you have to give the organization and the culture has to change. Where if you try, as long as you try, even if it doesn't work, it's okay.
Fail fast. Yeah.
Yes.
Dean, 2 seconds.
Spend proper money on R&D. Have separate units that target particular sectors and verticals and are not beholden to one mothership technology, which is not fit for purpose in individual sectors.
Thank you so much for the questions. Do we have time for another one? I don't think we do. Maybe we probably don't. So maybe we can jump outside and answer your question, but apologies for that. We're running out of time, but thank you so much. Matt, Nadya, Dean, big round of applause to our panelists. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.